On a storm-struck night in the San Juan Mountains, near the small town of Silverton, Colorado, an elderly woman named Dorothy Kane hears a knock on her cabin door. Outside, not a traveler, not a neighbor, but a group of nearly 30 Bigfoot, young and old, shivering in the blizzard, eyes filled with fear and hope, like souls searching for shelter in a world that never understood them. Without hesitation, Dorothy opens the door. They step inside, slowly, carefully, as if afraid to break anything in her tiny home. They sit by the fire. They share her food, always feeding the young ones first. Not a single growl, not a single threat, just gratitude and silence. By morning, they vanish. But the miracles remain. Her firewood pile, once empty, is full. Her pantry, once bare, now holds berries, mushrooms, and jars of golden honey. And the snowy mountain path, cleared, as if an entire crew had worked through the night. Dorothy looks out toward the woods. There they stand, watching. The biggest one bows deeply. They are not monsters. They are forest keepers, silent, intelligent, and kind. But when kindness is repaid with fear, what happens next? Hunters come. Traps are laid. Guns are loaded. Yet the Bigfoot don't fight with violence. They remove the traps, hang rifles high in the trees, and when fire engulfs the forest, they save Dorothy's life. And the box of memories of her late son. The town never knew, but Dorothy and a boy named Travis would never forget. And maybe now, you won't either. My dear viewer, where are you watching this from? What's your name? Because stories like this deserve to travel far, carried by hearts like yours. If this tale touched something in you, leave a like, subscribe, and help us grow a community that believes Bigfoot might not be a myth, but a silent guardian watching over us. To you, wherever you are, we send warmth, wonder, and wild gratitude. The wind had a voice of its own that morning, soft at first, curling around the worn eaves of the old cabin like an old friend whispering secrets, then rising, scraping across the rusted tin roof in a long, tired exhale. The kind of sound that made you stop in your tracks and listen, not because it was loud, but because it sounded like it remembered something you didn't. Dorothy Kane stood at the edge of her porch, mug of weak coffee in one hand, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, and listened. Her boots creaked on the old planks, the only other sound in that high-altitude hush where the mountains pressed close like they were holding their breath. Aspen leaves shimmered golden in the early light, their edges crisping with the first real chill of late fall. Far down the slope, the last of the elk moved like shadows between tree trunks, half there, half gone. And behind them, always just a few beats too late to name, something else moved. She never saw it, but she always knew. The town of Silverton sat below, nestled in the San Juans like a leftover story someone had forgotten to close. A mining town turned quiet tourist whisper. Its streets were lined with wooden storefronts and pickup trucks caked in trail dust. Folks up here weren't looking to be found. They just wanted the snow to wait a little longer. Dorothy had lived above the town long enough to know every ridge by name, every creek by its tone in spring, every owl by its call. People said she stayed on that mountain because she was stubborn. Truth was, she'd buried her heart there, wrapped in the avalanche that took her son Henry 5 winters ago. Some folks leave to survive. Others stay to remember. The only one who came up regular was Travis Mendez, 14. All elbows and opinions. His father worked for the county and didn't like Travis hanging around Dorothy, said she lived too close to ghosts. But the boy kept coming, splitting kindling, carrying dry goods, fixing the pipe under her sink last month like a man who wanted to prove something. Dorothy didn't ask why. She just made him stew and didn't mention the bruises. This morning she'd found something strange near the steps. Mud on the porch wasn't new. But these prints weren't hers, and they weren't Travis's either. They were wide, deep, with 5 long toes that pressed into the wood like someone had leaned their whole weight into them. Only, they led away. None toward. Nothing in between. She crouched and ran a hand over the biggest one. Damp, still fresh. The shawl on her shoulders was one she'd knitted last winter. A soft blue blend, Henry used to say, reminded him of morning fog on the ridge. She thought she'd lost it last week on her walk to the northern edge of the property. Now here it was, folded, clean, draped over the railing like a thank you. She didn't tell Travis, not yet. But that afternoon, when he showed up with a bag of flour and that silent, tight-set jaw of his, she found herself watching the edge of the woods more than usual. She noticed the way the wind would die for half a second when he laughed, just enough to catch something else waiting behind it. She didn't say a word until after he'd left, after the soup pot was clean and the sun had dipped behind the ridge. That's when she opened the old wooden chest under Henry's cot. Inside, wrapped in wax cloth and memory, was a piece of wood, carved years ago, long before the accident. It was rough, untrained, but unmistakable. Broad shoulders, bent knees, a sloped brow, and deep eyes. Henry had found it in the woods as a boy. Said it looked like the thing he saw at dusk once, near the river bend. He was 8. No one believed him. But Dorothy had kept the carving, like part of her wanted to believe something could still watch over what the world forgot. Now, years later, she ran her fingers over the ridged grooves again. The memory ached. 3 nights later, she noticed the scratches. Not claw marks, not gouged like a bear scenting a tree. No, these were precise, slashed in patterns, almost like symbols. They trailed along a young aspen just beyond her chicken coop. She followed them with her lantern, stepping into the early frost, feeling each breath turn to silver. The mark stopped about halfway up the tree, then vanished. Dorothy stood there for a long moment, the lantern heavy in her hand, her heart beat louder than she liked to admit. The darkness pressed close, but she didn't back away. She whispered into the cold like someone might actually be listening. "If you're still out there, I'm still here." She didn't expect an answer. But when she turned to go back inside, the porch light flickered. Twice. Once long, once short. The wind didn't move. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The storm was still 2 weeks away, but something in the air already knew. The walls of the cabin creaked like old bones settling into secrets. Dorothy stayed by the window, staring into the tree line. A fox crossed the clearing. An owl swooped low. Normal things, natural things. But in the stillness just before dawn, she heard it. Far off, almost gentle. One step, then another. Not fast, not afraid, but deliberate, and then silence. No rustle, no breathing. Just the heavy, full quiet of something choosing not to be seen. The next morning, the sky opened up into a blue so sharp it looked painted. Travis showed up late, breathless, cheeks red from the hike. "You hear about the storm?" he asked, setting down a box of canned beans. "Radio says it's going to be the worst in 100 years. Sheriff Linda says you should come down, stay in town, safer." Dorothy stirred sugar into his coffee without answering. "I can help you pack," he offered, voice softer. "I left once," she said finally. "When Henry got stuck up there. I wasn't here when he needed me. I'm not making that mistake again." He didn't argue, just nodded and looked out the window, toward the slope he used to sled on as a kid. When he left, she stood at the window long after he was gone, watching the clouds gather like bruises on the horizon. The wind had changed. That afternoon, a new stack of firewood appeared by the door. Chopped clean, the pieces even. Henry had a way of splitting logs in 3s, never 2s. It was something he'd picked up from an old-timer in town. She'd never told anyone. But there it was. His old rhythm, left neatly on her porch. Her hands trembled as she touched one of the logs. Behind her, the radio crackled. Sheriff Linda's voice, a little too calm. "All residents above Mineral Creek advised to evacuate. Storm front is accelerating. Repeat, accelerating." Dorothy turned it off. When night fell, It did so with a weight that pushed against the windows. Snow hadn't come yet, but it was on the wind. She lit the fire, checked the latch on the cellar door, and set the old lantern near her bed. But she didn't sleep. Not really. Sometime after midnight, a shape moved past the window. Not close, not fast, just a shadow passing where shadows shouldn't be. She got up, opened the door. Nothing. But in the dirt, footprints again, one, then another, leading toward the ridge. She didn't follow, but she didn't shut the door either. Instead, she stepped outside, wrapped the shawl tighter, and set into the trees. I remember. I haven't forgotten. And for just a second, in the silence between breaths, she thought she heard a sound. Low, rough, like someone trying not to cry. She stayed there until her fingers went numb, until the stars blinked out behind the rising storm, and the first snowflake of the season landed on her cheek. She didn't brush it away, because somewhere in the deep fold of the mountain's breath, something had heard her and answered. The morning came heavy and pale, like the sun had lost interest in showing up. Light didn't so much shine as it seeped, thin and gray, sliding off the snow-kissed ridgebacks and pooling in the valley like breath caught in a throat. Dorothy stood by the window, eyes narrowed, the radio crackling low in the background. Static, then a voice, tight and clipped, like someone bracing against cold wind even inside a booth. Record-setting system, cold front sweeping across the San Juans. High probability of whiteout conditions. Locals in high elevation zones urged to evacuate before evening. Repeat, this is not your average storm. She didn't blink. She just poured hot water over yesterday's coffee grounds and let the mug warm her fingers. The storm wasn't unexpected. The land had been whispering for days. The way the animals moved, the hush in the branches, the tension in the wind. Something deeper than weather was shifting, a low groan under the crust of the world. It wasn't the storm she feared. It was what it might stir. Travis didn't come that day, probably grounded. His father had a way of slamming doors that could be heard even up the ridge. Dorothy didn't mind the silence, not really. She'd grown used to the rhythms of being alone, but that day the quiet felt fuller, like someone or something was holding its breath alongside her. By noon, the sky had pressed so low it felt like a ceiling. Snow fell in dry, angry flecks, the kind that stung when they hit your face and disappeared before you could catch them on your tongue. Dorothy had just brought in the last of the firewood when the sheriff's truck crunched its way up the path. Linda stepped out first, always neat, always unreadable. Roy Holt followed, his boots thudding with that lawman weight, like every step had to mean something. Dorothy didn't invite them in. She just held the door open and leaned her hip against the frame. "You hear the warning?" Linda asked. Not unkindly. Dorothy nodded. "We're advising everyone above Mineral Creek to get down before nightfall. This one's different." "I've lived through worse," Dorothy said. Roy folded his arms, his breath fogging in front of him. "This ain't worse, Dorothy. This is historic." Linda stepped forward, lowering her voice like they were standing in a church. "You've still got time. We can wait. Help you pack up. Couple hours and you're in town with heat, lights, people." Dorothy didn't smile. "I left once. When Henry went missing, I wasn't here. He needed me and I wasn't home." A long pause. Linda looked down. Roy opened his mouth to say something, then didn't. "I'm not leaving," Dorothy said softly. They didn't argue, just nodded, left extra fire starter, and said if she changed her mind before sunset, the truck would make one last loop. She watched them drive off until the taillights blurred into the curtain of falling snow. Then, slowly, she stepped off the porch. The air had teeth now. She pulled her shawl tighter, boots crunching on the half-frozen crust. Something shimmered near the woodpile. Not light, something else. A pattern. She bent down, touched the top log. Perfectly stacked. Neat, like it had been placed with reverence. And wedged between two splits was a wedge Henry used to carve when he was bored. a little half-finished wood shaving, its edge curled like a question mark. She held it in her palm, heart hammering but not out of fear. That night, Dorothy didn't light the fire right away. She sat in the dark, watching the stove like it might decide to open a door. The window rattled once, then again, the kind of sound that made you reach for something solid. Instead, she walked toward the window. The snow had deepened, waist-high in places. But something had crossed through it, clean, heavy, not human. A path, impossibly straight, cutting through the drifts from the tree line all the way to the edge of her porch. Then, gone. Like whatever had made it had vanished into the air before taking the last step. She didn't sleep that night either. In town, stories were starting to crack through like frost on a windshield. Franklin Dodd, the old mechanic who always drank too early and talked too late, had told someone at the bar that back in '64, a storm had hit just like this. Roads gone, power out. Search teams couldn't get through for days. But when they finally reached the cabin line near Kings Pass, the snow was already cleared. Trees chopped, stacked, trails shoveled smooth like someone, or something, had gotten ahead of the storm. No tracks, no explanation, just a job done. "Some say it's the ridge folk," he told the bar crowd. "The ones who watch the mountain when we forget how." Most just laughed, but a few didn't. And out by the animal pens near the river, someone had found a trap sprung open, twisted like a pretzel. No blood, no fur, just a fresh trail of hoof prints darting free. Roy didn't like that. Said maybe someone was poaching again. Travis heard him ranting about it through the thin walls, about how people got soft, how nature needed to be kept in its place. Travis clenched his fists until his nails left half-moons in his palms. He'd been dreaming strange lately. Shapes in the snow, eyes that weren't cruel, just old. A warmth that followed him even when he woke up cold. The next day, he slipped out early, hiked the long path up to Dorothy's cabin, boots soaked, breath wheezing in his chest. When she opened the door, she didn't seem surprised to see him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." He didn't go home that night. By now, the storm had swallowed the road. There were no more trucks coming up, no more warnings, just wind and weight, and the groan of old wood holding back time. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. Travis sat by the hearth, rubbing his hands together, listening. Dorothy moved slower than usual, like the storm had settled into her bones. She pulled out canned peaches, spooned them into 2 chipped bowls, and sat down across from him. "You believe in watchers?" she asked quietly. Travis looked up. "People who don't live like us don't show themselves, but they've always been here. Long before roads, before fences." He nodded, slowly. "I think maybe, yeah." Dorothy looked out the window again, her eyes drifting to the dark. "I think Henry believed too." She didn't say more, didn't need to. That night, just before the fire dropped to embers, Dorothy heard it. A sound just on the edge of knowing. Like wood groaning, like something pushing against the walls. She got up, heart thudding like a warning drum. Travis stirred beside the hearth but didn't wake. The doorknob turned, once, twice, then stopped. Dorothy moved slowly, barefoot, the old floor cold against her soles. She put her hand on the latch, paused, took a breath like it might be her last, and opened the door. The snow had stopped falling, but the world had gone still in a way that felt deeper than silence. The porch sagged under weight. Not snow, something heavier. Shadows moved, not fast, not in a rush, but with purpose. 30 of them, maybe more, shapes that bent the edges of the night. Tall, broad, covered in fur the color of mountains in late dusk. Eyes that caught what little light there was and didn't reflect it. They absorbed it. The tallest of them stepped forward, his massive hand pressed gently against the support beam. The cabin groaned once more, and then stopped. The beam held. Dorothy didn't flinch. The creature's face, weathered, marked with old scars, lowered, almost like a bow. And in the faint light, Dorothy saw the line of a rope burn across its wrist. A memory slammed into her. Years ago. Henry, a winter storm. The rescue rope. Something in the trees. A shape moving away with purpose. And Henry screaming her name from behind the snow wall. The creature held her gaze, then slowly stepped aside. Behind him, others waited. Young ones, older ones. A baby held in arms like any mother would. And at the very back, barely taller than a garbage can, a smaller one looked up at Travis, now standing behind Dorothy, and took a step closer. No growl. No sound. Just a quiet curiosity. Dorothy stepped back, opened the door wider. "You're safe here," she said, though her voice shook. One by one they entered. 31 souls wrapped in 1,000 untold winters. And for the first time in years, the warmth in her cabin wasn't just from the fire. It was from being seen, and not feared, and not alone. The storm didn't announce itself with a roar. It crept in slow, a long breath held over the mountains, then exhaled all at once. By nightfall, the sky had collapsed into itself. What had started as snow became something heavier, angrier. Wind whipped through the timber like it had a grudge. The kind of cold that sank into your teeth and stayed there. The kind of dark where even your memories had trouble finding their way around. Dorothy moved carefully through the cabin, lantern in one hand, the other grazing the ceiling beams as if checking they were still where they belonged. The roof moaned. Timber strained. Outside, the trees bent sideways. The porch groaned like it might peel off the front of the house and fly east. She checked the cellar door again, rechecked the nails she'd hammered into the window frames. The fire snapped loud in the stove, trying to be brave. Her breath clouded in front of her as she moved. Travis sat by the fireplace, arms wrapped around his knees, trying not to look afraid. But he was. You could see it in the way his shoulders didn't quite settle, in how he flinched when the wind hit the walls just right. He shouldn't have been there. But earlier, just before the whiteout swallowed the mountain, he'd knocked on her door with a voice too thin to argue. His coat was soaked through. His eyelashes clung together with ice. Dorothy hadn't said anything. She just opened the door wider. Now they sat in the thick of it. The cabin rocked like a boat stuck in ice. A sound like splitting wood echoed from the rafters. Travis glanced up. "Should we?" he started, but Dorothy raised a hand. The wind paused. No, not paused, shifted. A lull, an inhale, like something just outside the door was leaning in. Then, clear and deliberate, came a sound that did not belong to the storm. 3 knocks. Not a pounding, not a beast crashing through. 3 quiet knocks. Soft, polite, like someone had brought over a pie. Dorothy froze. Travis looked at her. His lips moved, but nothing came out. She set the lantern down, stepped to the door. Her hand hovered over the latch. The cabin creaked again, but this time from a different weight. Not wind, not snow, pressure, like something was holding it together from the outside. She closed her eyes, breathed deep. She remembered the last time a knock had come in a storm. Years ago. Henry had heard it. A neighbor caught in a whiteout, he'd said. He'd gone out to help. She'd begged him to wait for help, begged him to stay inside just a little longer. But he'd said, "If someone's knocking, Ma, that means they're still alive." He never came back. She opened the door. There are moments in a life that do not explain themselves. They just exist. You don't process them until much later, if ever. They come in silence, in wait, in wonder, and they change everything. They stood there. Not one, not two, a crowd. More than 30, shapes too tall, too wide, too ancient to be human. Covered in thick fur, soaked dark from snow and time. Their chests rose in unison, not labored, not afraid, just steady. Their eyes, too many to count, shimmered in the snowlight, and not a single one blinked. At the front, a figure stepped forward, larger than the rest, shoulders like the trunk of a black spruce, One massive hand rested against the porch beam. Dorothy heard a crack as the beam bent, then held. The cabin groaned once more, but the roof didn't fall. That hand was holding it steady. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Dorothy looked down at the snow just past the threshold. The small prints caught her eye first. Bare, but not clumsy. Intentional. Just behind the tall figures, tucked to one side, a child stood. Its fur was lighter, like cinnamon dusted in ash. Its eyes were huge. It clutched something in its hands. Not a weapon, not a threat. A smooth river stone, glinting like it had been polished with care. The leader raised his scarred hand. Dorothy saw it clearly now. A burn. Rope burn, old and deep. Like something had tried to hold him once and failed. She remembered the rescue rope, the one Henry had wrapped around himself before disappearing into the blizzard. It had snapped mid-pull. Search and rescue had found the end caught on a branch, frayed. They'd never found what it had been tied to. The scar matched, and suddenly the quiet was unbearable. Dorothy stepped aside. She didn't say anything. Didn't have to. One by one, they ducked under the low wooden frame and entered her home. Each moved carefully, bowing ever so slightly, as if the cabin was holy ground. Their breath fogged the air, but not from fear. The leader paused beside her. For just a second, they stood shoulder to shoulder. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, but into her, the way only grief recognizes grief. Then he stepped inside. The cabin stretched in ways it shouldn't have. They moved slow, deliberate, their bodies massive but never loud. They didn't stomp, they didn't shove, they glided. Travis stood still, his back to the wall, wide-eyed. The small one approached him, head tilted. Travis flinched, but didn't run. The creature reached up and gently touched the sleeve of his coat. Just a tap, a greeting. Dorothy watched as the baby Bigfoot ducked its head and backed away, rejoining its group. But the connection had been made. She stoked the fire. The warmth spread like breath after a long-held silence. She passed out blankets, set down water, every motion a ritual. She didn't ask why they had come. She didn't ask how they had found her. She only knew they had chosen this place, not out of desperation, but maybe out of memory, out of trust. As the storm howled louder outside, the cabin held, and in its center, a new kind of quiet bloomed, a hush not born of fear, but of reverence. And as Dorothy sat by the fire, her body aching from old years and new awe, she realized something she hadn't dared to believe in a long, long time. She was not alone, not in the storm, not in the world, not anymore. And though the wind screamed against the glass, though the snow threatened to swallow the mountain whole, the walls stood strong. Because something older than fear had stepped inside, and it had remembered her name. The storm still roared outside, but inside the cabin, the air was strangely warm. Not just from the fire crackling in the stove or the stew pot humming softly on the edge of the coals. It was something else. Something alive. The kind of warmth you feel when a house is full and no one is arguing. When everyone's breath syncs with the same rhythm. The sound of 31 chests rising and falling like a quiet tide. All of it settling into the wood, the walls, the bones of a place that hadn't felt this kind of weight in years. Dorothy sat still in her chair, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, the knit loops worn thin at the elbows. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. They were everywhere, tucked beneath window frames, curled into corners too small for bodies that size, draped like rugs of fur beside the fire. Some crouched, some leaned, some huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to back. The tall ones had taken spots near the doors, as if guarding them. The smallest ones clung to older figures, their heads buried in thick coats of fur that rumbled with every breath. It didn't feel like a standoff. It felt like a vigil. No one had spoken. No one needed to. Not even Travis, who had long since dropped into a corner with a blanket tucked up to his chin, his eyes blinking wide in disbelief, but never fear. He didn't fidget. He didn't ask questions. He just watched. Because whatever was happening here didn't need explanation. It only asked for presence. The big one, the one who had held the beam outside, remained closest to the door, sitting now, his back against the wall like a sentinel. His breathing came in low waves, deep, steady, as if he were humming to the wood, as if the logs in the cabin itself remembered his voice and calmed in response. Dorothy reached for the kettle and poured warm water into an old mason jar, wrapped her hands around it like she had a secret to keep warm. She hadn't made it to the pantry for more tea leaves, and she didn't care. The warmth was enough. Her gaze landed on one of the youngest, a little one with a soft, rounded belly and fur that hadn't yet grown thick enough to cover his knees. He had crawled up to the edge of her rocking chair and was now resting his chin on the floorboard, eyes tilted up like he was trying to memorize her wrinkles. His fingers were long, curled, twitching now and then like he was trying not to reach for something. Without thinking, Dorothy opened the drawer next to her and pulled out a worn wooden spoon, smoothed by time. She set it gently on the floor. The little one stared, then inched closer, reached out, pulled it toward himself like it was something sacred. He didn't play with it. He just held it. Travis watched from across the room, his hand resting on the edge of a throw pillow like he might use it to shield himself. But his expression had changed. Not scared, not even stunned. Just open. Then came the moment she didn't expect. The oldest one moved. He had been sitting still near the fire, his long legs tucked beneath him, body folded in a way that defied anatomy. His face was carved deep with lines, eyes milky in one corner, as if time had worn one side faster than the other. He stood with slow intention, one massive hand dragging lightly across the floor for balance, and stepped toward the mantel. There, resting beside the small clock that hadn't ticked in 6 years, hung a photo of Henry, black and white, faded in the corners. A boy with hair a little too long, a smirk he'd never outgrow, and a rifle slung awkwardly across his back like he didn't really know how to hold it. The old one stared at the photo for a long time, not just looking, remembering. Dorothy felt her throat tighten. Then he reached up, so slowly it barely registered as motion, and tapped his chest once with 2 fingers. A beat. Then he brought his hand to his forehead and down again to the center of his chest. A gesture, not human, but not unfamiliar. It looked like a salute mixed with something gentler, something spiritual. Another followed suit, then another. Within seconds, all across the cabin, 31 figures echoed the same movement. Hand to chest, to forehead, and down again. The air thickened, not with fear, but reverence. Dorothy didn't know what it meant, but her heart knew. Somehow they remembered him, Henry, or maybe what he'd done. Maybe the rope burn on the wrist of the leader hadn't been from struggle. Maybe it had been from trying to hold on to Henry while the mountain tried to take him. She couldn't speak, so she did what a mother does. She fed them. She rose from her chair and moved toward the pantry, her knees stiff, her hand brushing the door frame for support. Cans, jars, preserves she'd long forgotten, pickled carrots, beans, honey from the neighbor's hive last spring. She pulled everything she could carry and set it on the table. One of them approached. A female, she thought, though it was hard to tell. She had eyes like amber and hands that moved with quiet purpose. The way she sorted the food on the table, separating sweet from savory, placing the soft items on top for the smallest ones, told Dorothy more than words ever could. These weren't beasts. They were a family, and they had rules. They ate in order. Not all at once. No shoving, no growling. The children were fed first, then the oldest, then those who had carried the young. The leader did not eat until everyone else had. Even then, he took only what was left. Dorothy sat back down and watched them chew with slow dignity. No slurping, no waste. Even the jars were sealed again once emptied and stacked neatly by the door. The stew pot went empty faster than she expected. She didn't mind. Later, when the fire had dimmed and the storm outside began to ease into something quieter, something more tired, the little one who'd taken the spoon wandered back to her chair. He placed something at her feet. It was rough, misshapen, probably carved from a branch that had broken in the storm, but it was unmistakable. Her rocking chair, her figure sitting in it, and beside it, a smaller figure. Not Henry, not Travis. The little one. A gift. She didn't touch it, not yet. Her hands were shaking too much, but she looked down at him and nodded once. He skittered back into the pile of limbs and warmth, curling between two others like a pebble in the riverbed. And then something impossible happened. The room began to hum. Not music, not noise. A vibration. It came from the leader first, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. A breath that vibrated through his ribs and into the floor. Then the others joined in. A lullaby made of breath. The timbers of the cabin creaked. The windows no longer shuttered. And for the first time since the storm began, Dorothy heard the wind fall silent. She didn't know when she fell asleep. She just knew she hadn't dreamed, because when she woke, the world was still warm. And the only thing louder than her heartbeat was the soft sound of 31 souls breathing beside her. The silence was what woke her. Not the kind that meant something was missing, but the kind that meant everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either. Just still, like the cabin had become part of the snow itself. Dorothy opened her eyes and the ceiling looked the same, but the light, soft, low, golden, was different. Softer than lamplight, but clearer than fire. A kind of hush that only comes after something enormous has passed. She sat up slowly, the quilt slipping off her shoulders. Her joints ached in that familiar, gentle way. Her fingers reached instinctively for her shawl draped on the rocker beside the stove. But as her eyes adjusted, she stopped. The rocker was empty. The room was empty. No footprints, no fur, no shapes curled by the hearth. Just a faint trail of heat still lingering in the air, the way breath does after laughter. The cabin smelled like cedar and broth and snowmelt. She rose to her feet. The floor creaked beneath her. The fire had died to a bed of ash, still warm if you crouched close. But there were no embers. She crossed the room, half expecting to hear a heavy breath or catch a shadow moving just out of sight. But all that greeted her was the sound of her own heartbeat, steady, slow. At the door, she paused, then opened it. The sun hit her square in the face, not the weak winter sun that skims across the ridges without touching anything. This was real sun. Full, wide, burning gold on the snow-packed trees, bouncing off the branches like joy. The sky was a sharp blue, too blue, like it had been scrubbed clean by some invisible hand. She stepped out barefoot. Didn't even notice. The snow should have been thigh-deep by now. But instead, there was a clear path. No, a road, running from her doorstep all the way down the hill, straight through the trees, through bends and dips and boulders that should have blocked it. It had been cleared. Not roughly, not hacked through. Smoothed, lovingly. And beside the porch, her wood box sat full, perfectly full. Not just logs stacked. These were measured, cut to the exact lengths Henry used to make. Each piece split into thirds, not halves, the way he always said burned cleaner. She dropped to her knees and touched the top log. It was dry, still carried the scent of pine sap. She turned it over. A small mark was carved on the edge. 3 lines crossed with a 4th. Henry's old habit, his way of keeping count. Her fingers trembled. She stood. The cabin door still wide behind her. A breeze passed through, warm and dry, like a breath out of the earth. Then she saw the jars. By the side wall just beneath the kitchen window, someone, some group, had arranged a tidy stack of food, things that didn't belong to her. A rack of dried berries strung on twisted vines, a bundle of root vegetables, half a smoked trout, and in the middle of it all, like a centerpiece, a full honeycomb glowing amber in the sun, still dripping. She reached for it. It was warm, sticky. The honey hadn't even begun to crystallize. That meant it had been placed recently, maybe even minutes ago. She scanned the edge of the woods, heart stuttering. Movement, far off near the aspens. She stepped off the porch. The snow was cold now, sharp against her skin. But she didn't stop. Something small darted between trunks, then paused. A shape, low, furry, watching. She took a step closer, not expecting anything, not asking. And then it happened. From behind the trees, at the edge of the clearing, they appeared. Not all of them, just a few, maybe 5. The leader stood tall in the back. That same long frame, arms like carved stone. 2 smaller ones stood near his legs. A youngling just beside them, the cinnamon-furred one, still clutching that wooden spoon like it was his birthright. They didn't speak, but they bowed. Not deep, just enough. And the youngest stepped forward. He looked at her, blinking slowly, like trying to burn the memory of her face into his mind. Then he reached behind him and placed something on the snow. Carefully, deliberately, a flat stone. Then another, then a third. 3 stones, in a row. No pattern Dorothy recognized. But they weren't random. The child looked at her, then back at the stones, then turned and ran. Not clumsily, not in fear, but with the joy of someone who knows where they're going. The others followed, silent, fading into the trees like shadows finding their place again. She stood there for a long time, the sun climbing higher, burning the frost off the roof, her breath coming slow and deep. Travis came up behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped beside her. Barefoot, too, didn't even flinch. "Where'd they go?" he whispered. Dorothy couldn't answer. She just stared at the snow, and then, without turning, said, "They left us something." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the road cleared through the snow. It ran for what had to be miles, down the ridge, through the trees, toward town, a road that would have taken a snow crew a full day to dig out. Travis squinted. "No one's come up, not even the sheriff." "No," she said. "They didn't come from below." And he understood. She turned back to the porch, saw the honeycomb again. Then something caught her eye. A print. Small, 5 long toes pressed into the edge of the woodpile, sticky with honey. And right beside it, another, smaller still. Travis was quiet for a long time, then said, "I heard something last night. Thought I was dreaming." "What did you hear?" "Footsteps on the roof, soft ones, almost like—" He didn't finish. Didn't have to. Dorothy walked back inside. The warmth hit her like a memory. She looked around. The rocking chair had been moved back in place. The carving the child had left still sat on the floor near it. She picked it up, traced its edges, then looked to the spot on the mantel where Henry's picture had always stood. It was still there, but now, beside it, sat something new. A bundle of pine needles twisted into a small shape, like a nest, or maybe a crown. She didn't cry, not then, but later, when she lit the fire, and Travis read aloud from a book she hadn't opened in years, and the sunlight shifted across the floor just so. She felt the tears start to build. And when she looked out the window and saw, just for a second, a figure on the ridge raising its hand, not waving, just acknowledging, she let them fall, not from grief, but from awe. She whispered to no one, and to everyone at once, "I only shared a little warmth." And they gave back an entire winter, and the wind, moving through the trees like a hush, carried her words somewhere only the mountains could understand. It started with a sentence, tossed out casually like a match in dry grass. "That road didn't get cleared by any crew I know," said Marvin Brinks, squinting through the steam of his coffee in the back booth at Hattie's Diner. 3 people heard it. One of them told 6 more. By the time the sun hit its peak over Silverton, the whole town was murmuring. Dorothy didn't come down from the mountain that day. She rarely did. But her name danced on people's tongues again, strung between words like storm, tracks, road cleared, cabin, and something else that didn't settle right. Huge footprints. Not from snowshoes, not from moose. Something different. Roy Holt caught wind of it before his second cigarette. He didn't like loose threads. He especially didn't like the idea of anything unaccounted for in his woods. He kept order like it was an old debt he never quite finished paying off. His father had run search and rescue back in the 70s. Roy had grown up on ghost stories and lost hikers. But this was different. This was fresh. Too many folks saying too many of the same strange things. By that evening, he'd loaded the back of his pickup with 4 traps, 2 rifles, a thermos of black coffee, and a notebook marked Winter Anomalies. 2023. He didn't ask Sheriff Linda for permission, didn't warn Dorothy. Just drove. Snow still blanketed the tree lines, but the road up to Dorothy's place had been scrubbed down to dirt and gravel. The kind of job even the county didn't pull off that clean. He stopped twice, got out, checked for tire tracks. None. But he found something else. A print. Wide, deep. 5 toes like a human. But stretched. Heavy. More pressure in the heel than a man would leave. It was fresh. He crouched, lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake until now. They'd always said the mountains held secrets. He figured that meant buried things. Quiet things. This wasn't quiet. This was a door opening. Roy turned the page in his notebook and wrote down a single word. Bait. Travis hadn't been sleeping well. Not since the snow melted and the cabin emptied. He kept hearing things at night, branches brushing the roof in patterns too, even to be random. Stones clicking in a rhythm that matched his pulse. A low hum outside his window, like the ground itself was thinking. He hadn't told his father. That man already blamed Dorothy for every weird thought Travis ever had. But he did tell Katie, his little sister, 7 years old and sharp as a tack. Katie believed him. She said she'd seen something too. A shape, tall and still, outside her window the night of the storm. Said she'd fallen back asleep to the sound of breathing. Not her own, not their dog's. Something heavier. Kinder. Was it watching you? Travis asked. No, she whispered, like sharing a promise. It was guarding me. He didn't argue. That afternoon, he hiked back up the ridge alone, heart thudding in his chest with each step. Not from fear, from longing. He needed to know. Dorothy saw him coming before he reached the porch. She was chopping kindling, each swing of the hatchet precise, rhythmic. She didn't speak when he arrived. Just handed him a smaller axe and nodded toward the next log. They worked in silence. Then she said, "You felt it too." He nodded. Later they sat with mugs of broth, watching the smoke drift sideways in the wind. "I think they're still near," she said. "I hope so," he whispered. Down below, Roy was setting his traps. He didn't use the old rusted bear clamps. These were new. Spring-loaded, baited with scraps from the butcher's back room. Meat that reeked even to his own nose. He placed them in a crescent arc along the North Pass. He wanted to catch something. But the next morning, when he returned, every trap was untouched. Not empty, untouched. Set in a perfect ring, clean, rearmed, and stacked in the exact order he'd placed them, right beside his truck. He froze, looked around. The woods were quiet, too quiet. A chill crawled up his spine that had nothing to do with the air. Then he saw it, high in a tree, 15 feet up. His rifle hung over a branch like a towel on a hook. No ladder, no boot marks, just the wind, just the trees, just that low, invisible presence that pressed against the base of his neck, like he was being watched by someone who didn't blink. Travis woke that night to a sound outside his window. Not loud, not sharp, just soft stones tapped together. He got up, heart thudding, pulled on boots without socks, and stepped into the night. Moonlight silvered the ground. At the base of the tree by his window, 3 small stones lay side by side. He bent down, each had a scratch on it. 1 line, 2 lines, then a circle. He didn't understand, but he felt it meant something. He left them there. In the morning, they were gone. That week, strange stories crept through the edge of town like wood smoke. A trapper's tent, found torn open. but his gear arranged neatly beside a fire pit, untouched. A hiker lost for 2 days, then found asleep at the ranger station steps, wrapped in a fur she couldn't explain. Sheriff Linda listened to every report, filed them calmly, and made no calls. She wasn't ready to explain what she suspected, but she started driving the mountain roads more often. Alone. She stopped by Dorothy's one evening, under the pretense of delivering canned goods. Dorothy invited her in. They sat, shared tea. Linda stared at the old wood beams overhead, then at the carving sitting on the shelf. Small, crude, unmistakably shaped like a creature with wide shoulders and bowed head. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she asked. Dorothy didn't answer. "Didn't need to." Linda nodded. "Whatever they are," she said, "they're not the threat." Dorothy looked up. "Then who is?" Linda didn't blink. "Us," she said. Roy hadn't stopped. He brought in motion cameras, set them high, hidden. He got nothing. No blur, no movement, just footage of squirrels, snow, the occasional deer. Until one morning, he checked a camera he thought had frozen, and found it clean, as if someone had wiped the lens with care. A single frame, black. Then, a hand, massive. Fingers longer than a man's, a palm pressed flat against the lens. Then gone. No animal, no threat. Just a message. "We see you. We're letting you look, but not too close." Later that week, a boy walking with his father along the edge of town saw a figure standing still in the trees. Tall, still, watching. He didn't scream. He waved. The figure raised a hand in return, then turned and disappeared into the woods without a sound. That evening, the boy placed a flower on their front porch, just in case someone came back to see it. Dorothy lit a candle that night, placed it on the windowsill. No words, just light, in case someone was looking for home. It hadn't rained in weeks. The dirt roads cracked like old skin, and the creek beds ran dry so early the trout never stood a chance. Pines stood silent in the heat, their sap boiling slow under the bark. You could hear the whisper of pitch cracking on the trunks if you stood still enough, like the trees were warning each other in a language too slow for humans to catch. Up along the high ridge above Silverton, Dorothy Kane stood in her doorway with a glass of lukewarm water and watched the sky lose its color. The wind had changed, not just its direction, but its smell. Sharp, electric. Dry lightning was a thing up here, and when it struck, it didn't ask permission. It just came fast, kissed the earth hard, and left everything behind smoldering. The first plume of smoke rose on a Tuesday afternoon. Thin, harmless looking. But anyone who knew the mountain knew better. Dorothy had seen this story play out before. In '79, a spark off a camper's stove had swallowed 3 valleys in 2 days. This one was higher, hungrier. By nightfall, the town's radio was nothing but static and orders. Highway 550 shut down. Evacuation advisories, containment lines failing. The fire had leapt the canyon. By dawn, the sheriff came knocking. Linda didn't have to say a word. Her face said everything. "You've got to go," she whispered. "This one's not going to stop." Dorothy didn't argue, but she didn't pack. She walked to the back room instead. The small one Henry had slept in. The one she hadn't stepped foot in since the night before the avalanche. It smelled like memory and pine. On the shelf sat a wooden box, hand-carved, blackened along one edge where the fire from the old stove had licked it years ago. She took it down with both hands. She didn't need it, but she needed to carry it. When she stepped outside, the sky was bruised orange. Ash floated like tired snow. And in the far trees, the wind carried the first real crackle of flame. Travis was already running up the ridge, mouth open, eyes wild. He'd heard the alerts, but when he saw Dorothy wasn't at the emergency shelter, he'd gone looking. He found her walking into the smoke. "Where are you going?" he shouted, grabbing her elbow. "I have to get this back to the place it belongs," she said, nodding at the box. "That's not safe." "I left once, Travis, and it cost me more than I can say. I'm not leaving again without what's mine." Travis didn't argue. He grabbed a scarf from his backpack, wrapped it around her mouth, tied one around his own, and followed. The smoke got worse past the ridge. It clawed at their throats and blurred the trail. But the air held something else, something beneath the fire. A sound, low, rhythmic, not animal, not machine. And then they appeared. From between the burning trees, shadows moved. Tall, sure-footed, familiar. The first to step through the smoke was the one Dorothy had come to think of as the elder. His fur was streaked with gray, his eyes lit with something ancient. And behind him came the rest. Not all of them, but enough. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He looked at the box in her hands and stepped forward. Dorothy knelt. Not because she had to. Because it felt right. She offered the box with both hands. He took it like it was a child, then nodded once. They turned together, and the mountains shifted. The Bigfoot, no longer rumor, no longer myth, moved through the forest with purpose. Behind them, the flames danced closer, but the heat didn't seem to touch them. They didn't run. They didn't flinch. They carried water from hidden springs in bark-wrapped bundles. They stamped out fire lines with feet the size of snowshoes. They moved like the forest belonged to them, like they remembered how to fight for it. Travis couldn't believe what he was seeing, but he didn't blink. Dorothy followed them to a shallow ravine she hadn't seen before. Inside, a circle of stone, carved symbols, and in the center, an ancient bowl, charred black, still warm. The elder placed the box beside it, turned his face to the rising smoke, and let out a sound not meant for human ears. Low, vibrating. The wind shifted. For just a moment, the smoke lifted, and from behind the ridge, clouds rolled in, fast, dark, unnatural. A single drop hit Dorothy's cheek, then another, then rain, not enough to stop the fire, but enough to slow it. And it wasn't just the rain that saved them. From the cliffs above the valley, figures moved with coordination, dropping rocks to redirect the flames, felling dead trees with brutal precision, carving fire breaks wider than any bulldozer ever could. Travis stared in disbelief. "They're saving us," he whispered. Dorothy didn't answer. She was watching something else. The young one, the same small Bigfoot with the soft cinnamon fur, ran into the edge of the fire line with something in his arms. He disappeared into the smoke. Seconds later, he came stumbling back, clutching the wooden box. Its edge charred, but not destroyed. Dorothy ran to him. His arms were burned, not deeply, but enough. He looked up at her, eyes wide, and in that moment, something in her broke open. She dropped to her knees, pulled him into her arms, and wept. Not because she was afraid, not because she was grateful, because holding him felt like holding Henry again. Because whatever love she had once lost was now moving through her chest like fire through pine. He pressed his face into her neck, said nothing. She kissed the top of his head. Smoke thickened again. The fire wasn't gone, but the forest was fighting back. And it wasn't doing it alone. By nightfall, the fire crews arrived. Air tankers overhead, ground teams breaking through. But what they found stunned them. The fire had changed direction, entire lines of trees untouched. Animal burrows shielded by rocks no one remembered placing. Clear trails carved out of the densest parts of the forest. Like someone had known where the fire would go and beat it there. No footprints, no machinery, just silence, and a cabin untouched. Later, one of the rangers said, "It's like the mountain saved itself." But Dorothy knew better. She sat on her porch that night, ash still falling like a slow snowfall. The air smelled like pine and wet dirt. The stars came out one by one, and from the ridge above, she saw a silhouette. Tall, still, lift one arm and rest it on a tree trunk. Watching, not claiming, not warning, just being there. The way Henry used to do when he checked the windows before bed. She wrapped her shawl tighter, whispered, "Thank you," and meant it. The aspens turned early that year. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe it was the rain that followed. Too brief to heal, but enough to shift something underneath the soil. But by the first week of September, the whole mountainside had turned to flame. Bright red, molten gold, every leaf flickering like it was carrying its own memory of what had nearly come undone. Dorothy sat on the porch with a quilt across her knees and a mug of apple cider warming both hands. The chair creaked beneath her, soft and steady, the way it always had. Somewhere behind the trees, a hawk called out once. The wind came down from the north, rustling the treetops like a hand smoothing the hair of a restless child. The air smelled of dry leaves and something older. Cedar. Smoke long vanished. Rain never far off. The town had mostly moved on. Summer festivals had returned, though smaller now. The local paper ran a piece called "Silverton Remembers the Fire," but left out the part about how the blaze had turned at the last minute like it knew to spare certain places. It mentioned the strange, clean fire breaks, the untouched ridgelines, the empty clearings that hadn't existed on any Forest Service map. But it chalked those up to luck. Winds, topography. God. Nobody said the other word, not out loud. The stories, though, they lived on. At the fall fair, Franklin Dodd stood in front of a crowd of children gathered around the hay bales by the cider booth. He wore his old ranger jacket like a uniform, even though he hadn't held the job in 20 years. His voice carried the gravel of someone who'd seen things he didn't always want to name. He told them about the snowmen of the San Juans. Said they came when the world forgot how to behave. Said there was once a storm so bad the plows gave up halfway through, and yet by morning, the main road was clear. No tracks, no tires, just clean earth and silence. Said sometimes, if you left the right kind of offering by the edge of the woods, berries, a candle, a carved stone, you might get a favor in return. A fence mended, a lost dog found, a child who didn't fall off that ledge they were never supposed to climb. The kids giggled, wide-eyed. The adults watched with narrowed eyes, some smirking, others not. Dorothy heard all of it from her perch on the edge of the square. She said nothing, just watched, rocked. That night she had guests, one last dinner before Travis left for college. He'd been accepted to a wildlife ecology program 3 states away, on full scholarship. She'd pretended not to cry when he told her. She'd baked him a blackberry pie instead. Katie came too, barefoot and half-grown, with a pocket full of painted rocks and questions she never stopped asking. They sat around the wood stove even though the air was still warm. The old quilt Henry used as a kid lay across Travis's lap. His boots were scuffed from the hike, and his hair longer than Dorothy liked. But his eyes were clear. "This place'll be here when you get back," she said. He nodded, didn't speak. Then after a while, he whispered, "Do you think they'll still be here?" Dorothy didn't answer right away. She reached for a match, lit the lantern on the table, watched the flame catch slow. "I think they never left," she said. Later, when the house had gone quiet and Katie had fallen asleep with her head on Dorothy's shoulder, Travis stepped out onto the porch. The stars burned above him. Somewhere in the far trees, an owl called. And then, movement. Just a shadow at first. Then clearer. A figure, tall, unmoving, standing where the tree line dipped into the north ravine. The same place Henry had once seen something and carved it into wood. The same place Travis had heard those stones being tapped together in the dead of winter. He raised his hand, slow, pressed it to his chest, then to his forehead, then back to his chest. The figure watched, and then, like mist before the sun, faded back into the forest. Dorothy watched from inside, saw his shape silhouetted in the doorway, saw the moment he lowered his hand and just stood there, heart full of 100 unspoken things. She didn't interrupt, just stayed where she was, her hand resting on the edge of Henry's box. The next morning before Travis left, he placed something inside that box. It wasn't much, just 3 stones stacked in a triangle. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. That afternoon, as the town gathered for the final day of the fair, Dorothy passed by the carving booth run by the high school art club. And there, hanging between wind chimes and cutting boards, was a small piece of pine, rough-hewn, simple, a single scene, a cabin, a storm, and a line of tall figures stepping through the snow toward the light. She bought it without a word. That night she placed it in the box with Henry's photo and the nest of pine needles left long ago. 2 stories, 1 truth. The day after Travis left, Geraldine, a neighbor who barely left her house since her husband died, was walking her dog along the edge of the woods near her property. The sun was slanting low. Her knees ached. Her breath came hard. She paused near a fallen tree and leaned against the bark, closing her eyes, and felt a hand. Not rough, not sudden, just a firm, steady touch on her shoulder. When she turned, no one was there. But in the snow beside her, tracks were two others, huge, deep, and leading back into the trees. That evening, she called Dorothy for the first time in years. They talked for hours, didn't say the word. But they both knew, and somewhere far above them, near the place the fire never reached, 3 stones sat in a triangle at the base of an ancient pine, a quiet marker, not for death, for gratitude, for memory, for stories that never needed to be written down to survive. And as the seasons turned again, as the winds cooled and the first frost painted the leaves silver, Dorothy lit a single candle each night at her window. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes a pine cone would appear on her step. Once, a bundle of wild thyme wrapped in bark string. But every night she lit it, and every night she whispered, "I remember." And every night the wind replied, not in words, but in the hush of trees swaying in rhythm with something older than fear, something older than language, something that would always find its way back. So long as someone remembered, so long as someone stayed kind. Because kindness, she'd come to believe, was not just a choice. It was a direction. And sometimes, when you gave it freely, the mountain gave it back. Not always right away, but always. There are stories that live beyond the page, not because they're the loudest or the most dramatic, but because they remind us of something we've always known, even when we forget. That the world is vast, yes, but it listens. That even in the deepest forest, where no streetlight glows and no map leads the way, something might be waiting, not to frighten us, but to meet us, quietly, patiently, in its own ancient language of kindness. We go through life carrying more than we let on, grief tucked in coat pockets, regret folded into old photographs, hopes we're afraid to name. But sometimes, if we're lucky, or brave enough to be still, we find that not everything in this world is looking to take from us. Sometimes it gives, softly, unexpectedly, without a name or reason. And isn't that what makes the human experience bearable? Not the certainty of safety, but the possibility of grace. That on our loneliest days, when we believe no one sees us, something might. A presence, a kindness, a gesture returned not because it's owed, but because it matters. There is a quiet power in believing the best in what we don't understand, in choosing care over fear, in offering shelter to something the world calls impossible, and finding, in return, that we are the ones being protected. Not by fences or laws or even logic, but by the echo of every good thing we've ever done, coming back to us in a form we never expected. You don't need to see it with your eyes. You just need to trust that kindness always leaves a trail. It doesn't vanish. It waits. Sometimes for seasons, sometimes for years. But it always knows the way home. Not because it was marked on a map, but because it was planted in the hearts of those who dared to love without condition. And so maybe that's the deeper truth, that the stories we share, the fires we light, the hands we extend without asking anything in return, they shape the unseen world. They hold back the dark. They call down the rain when the fire runs wild. And sometimes, if we're very quiet, they speak back to us, in dreams, in echoes, in the hush of trees. Thank you for walking with us through this journey, through snow and fire, through silence and return. If this story found a place in your heart, if it stirred something you'd once lost or longed for, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear what it meant to you. And if you believe the world could use more stories like this, stories that hold space for wonder, for grief, for grace, consider subscribing to our channel. Turn on the bell. Share it with someone who still believes in the unseen. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. And somewhere just past the tree line, They're still listening.